Guess we'll get started. Everyone suddenly became very quiet at the time we're supposed to start. So that's my key to get going. Because I have been known to just keep chatting. I don't think we need the mic. This room is great, so you can actually talk without a mic. So I'm just going to ask our panelists to use their teacher voices, which I know they all have, so that those of us in the room and those of us watching on Zoom can hear all your words of wisdom. So I'm Stephanie Kirk, and I'm the director of the Center for the Humanities, and really grateful for everyone showing up this morning, Monday morning, both in person or online, to today's event, Cultivating Dynamic Environments, a blueprint for collaboration, innovation, and leadership in the humanities, which the Center for the Humanities has organized in collaboration with the Program in Public Scholarship and its director, Dr. Patricia, favorite collaborator, along with, of course, other collaborators who are also here. You're all my favorites. So this event is, it was conceived of a while ago as a follow-up to an event we had in November 2023, which was called Rethinking Tenure and Promotion Assessment in the Humanities. And we discussed in that conversation how we move beyond traditional evaluation criteria in search of supporting leading edge work. So today, the idea is to focus on collaborative innovation and how creative leadership can drive these processes. And we've invited an amazing group of guests who have led transformative work at their institutions and in their organizations. And the aim is to have a productive conversation on the challenges and rewards of these efforts. However, it goes without saying that we were always supposedly in crisis, but now, so quickly we've shifted into this, moment of these unprecedented threats. And so, while of course we need to discuss those things, at the same time I think it's crucial to uphold our values, support our most vulnerable community members, and strengthen our coalitions both within and beyond the academy. So even though the topic was conceived of before this current moment, I think there's a lot of things that we can still discuss that will help us maintain and strengthen the things that we as humanists and those in other disciplines really hold dear. So we probably won't answer all the questions today, but I hope our discussion helps us really think how to build alliances and to better advocate for the importance of our work. Just quickly like to thank the amazing team at the center, particularly Alicia Dean, Kathleen Fields, Meredith Cohen. No one could ever ask for a better staff, and so I'd like to thank them for helping me put together the event. I'd like to thank Here and Next, which is the University Strategic Plan, for their generous and continued financial support, particularly Mary McKay, Executive Vice Provost, as well as the Dean of Arts and Sciences, Feng Shanghu, for his continued support of the humanities. We will have 5 panels today, and I know people can't stay and can't, but we'll be coming and going, but we do hope that you'll be able to join us for some of the discussions. We'll have a couple of panels, and then we'll break for lunch from the amazing Welcome Neighbor, which is like a refugee kitchen here in St. Louis, and they do the best food, which all panelists and public are invited. And then we'll have 2 more panels after lunch, and then a conclusion with reflections from all on today's conversation. So I'll return to introduce our first panel after my colleague, Andrew Brown, Professor of Hispanic Studies and Vice Dean of Faculty Affairs in Arts and Sciences, will kindly make some introductory remarks. Thanks, Andrew.
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie. I love that we're here under the auspices of 2 incredible organizations that we have here at Washington University, the Center for the Humanities and the Program for Public Scholarship. I was at a lecture the other day, and the speaker mentioned some time that she had spent in Program in Public Scholarship, and then said, "I wish we had something like that at Harvard." But the fact that the Center for the Humanities is bringing us together, I think, speaks to how important the role the humanities has in making these kinds of connections and in thinking about innovation. And that's something that in arts and sciences we felt very strongly about. As I was thinking a little bit about this and looking at our group of vice deans, I realized that our humanities folks outnumber everybody else on a factor of 2 to 1. And in fact, when we think about how we envision the humanities in arts and sciences, we think about the fact that we have to put our very best people to effect an incredible change. When we created a position that, among the vice deans that was going to focus on innovation and on interdisciplinary work, it made complete sense to have a humanist, Billy Acree, lead that charge. And the number of things that he's been able to do to bring people together across all of the different disciplines speaks to the potential that we have as humanists to do that very work. When we recognize the power that the Center for the Humanities has and can wield, then we have to put somebody like Stephanie Kirk in place to do that. And so I've just been very proud of what we've been able to recognize and harness in arts and sciences as we make the important kinds of contributions to challenges that are incredibly difficult. And recognizing that as we go forward protecting and defending and innovating, we have to recognize too that our ability to innovate, to think more broadly, to talk to more than just ourselves is going to be absolutely crucial. Now, as Stephanie said, this event was conceived of long before everything has gone the way that it has. But the planners had a strong sense that this cluster of issues, leadership, collaboration, innovation, formed an important nexus in our moment, and this is just more true now and more true more urgently than it ever has been. So as we look forward toward uncertain and possibly turbulent years in higher education and university-based research, it is critical to understand our roles as leaders in the classroom, in our disciplinary fields, and in public settings, but also as collaborators and as co-creators of knowledge. And not just how, but why we innovate. These are pressing questions that we must be willing to ask ourselves and each other, even if we don't yet have good answers. Because innovation is all too often co-opted by forces that threaten our very existence as a species, much less as educators. So today's panels will cover a wide range of opportunities and challenges, and we hope that what comes out of this event is inspiring and community building, but also motivating in grounded ways for practical contexts on campus and beyond. I also want to recognize that this is the center, this was organized by the Center for the Humanities, and a lot of us are humanists here. But we have our chair of Earth, Environmental, and Planetary Sciences here too, David White, that speaks to the great goodwill that so many of our natural scientists and our social scientists have for doing this work, and the recognition that goes well beyond that. I think so many times as humanists we like to get into a bunker mentality while not recognizing the great goodwill and the great forces that we have to work together to protect all of us equally together. And so with that, let's get started.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew, for those kind and uplifting remarks. So our first panel, Leading in the Humanities in Turbulent Times. Our wonderful colleague, Kia Caldwell, is going to be the moderator. Kia, as you know, is Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs and Diversity, a professor in African and African American Studies, and the Dean's Distinguished Professorial Scholar in Arts and Sciences. And as I give that very brief bio of Kia's, I'm going to just mention that I'm not going to give long and extensive introductions like everyone who's speaking today from both our guests and from WashU is incredibly accomplished, but for questions of time, so please, if anyone's curious, I encourage you to read our guests' full bios when you can. So Kia will be moderating a conversation with three of our guests. I'd like to ask our guests to come and sit at the table so that will be Jeffrey, Chris, and Pat, and then I'm going to quickly introduce you all so that everybody knows who, and that probably because the day is going to be people coming and going, I might have to do this introduction several times. But so next to Kia is Patricia Parker. Patricia Parker is Director of the Institute for the Arts and Humanities and the Ruel W. Tyson Jr. Distinguished Professor of Humanities at UNC Chapel Hill. Her community-based research focuses on communication for social justice. As the inaugural Director of Faculty Diversity Initiatives at UNC, she launched the Diversity Liaisons Program and helped establish the Triangle Women in STEM Network. In 2007, she founded the Ella Baker Women's Center for Leadership and Community Activism. And Dr. Parker currently co-chairs the University Commission on History, Race, and a Way Forward, and works with the university's Studying Slavery Consortium. Next to Pat is Chris Long, a philosopher by training. Christopher P. Long is Provost and Senior VP at the University of Oregon. Known for values-driven leadership, he champions the transformative power of liberal arts education. He has led and continues to lead impactful initiatives such as the Mellon-funded Less Commonly Taught and Indigenous Languages Partnership, the Public Philosophy Journal, and Humetrics, all focus on making higher education more inclusive, accessible, and aligned with core values. And last but not least, Jeffrey Cohen is the Dean of Humanities in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and Foundation Professor of English at Arizona State University. A scholar of English, he is widely published in medieval studies, master theory, and environmental humanities. Under his leadership, ASU's Humanities Division has seen growth in both enrollment and programs in recent years. And ASU now, and this may not be completely up to date, so correct me if I'm wrong, but has over 4,000 humanities majors, surpassing many liberal arts colleges in enrollment. That's truly impressive. Thanks, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here on this sunny Monday morning. We know we had a lot of rain recently. I'm thrilled to be here. I think this is such an important time for us to be having these conversations and to really honestly be strategizing. So thank you to Stephanie and Chris for having the foresight in planning this gathering. So I will ask a few questions and then we're going to open it up to the audience for the last 20 minutes or so just for a broader conversation. So the first question is about change. As we know, change can often be threatening, especially when change is prompted by crisis or contraction. How can academic leaders work with change and help their colleagues and students adjust and imagine new paths forward rather than entrench? Whoever would like to take that on.
Are we going to go in order? I would have chosen a different seat.
Oh.
No, it's okay. I'm fine. Well, good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Stephanie, for the invitation. That's a big question, and I think we should define our terms. Change is always happening, right? So it's, are you doing incremental change or are we doing transformational change? And, it occurs to me that on our campuses right now, whether we want to believe it or not, or embrace it or not, we're in the midst of transformational change. And this is something that we talked about last night. It's an opportunity for those of us who've been thinking about, I'll speak for myself, I've been looking forward to the kind of transformational change that would cause our leaders at our universities to be accountable to communities. Oftentimes we are very affluent universities situated right in the midst of the most impoverished areas in our state. And so what would it look like for leaders to be actually accountable to the people? And for me, I'm at a public university in North Carolina, so what would that look like for us to be accountable to the people of North Carolina, all the people of North Carolina? To me, that's a transformational change. So I'll just take that part of the question. There are two parts, but I'll just take for that one. Well, the other term to be defined would be entrenchment, but I'll leave that one alone. Let's just go with the transformational change. So I feel like I'm in a position now at my university where I can be part of leading that transformational change. I've been studying community engagement my whole career, even before it was wise for me to do that. and I still got tenured, and I'm still a distinguished professor. So I get to claim that. And I'm director of the Institute for the Arts and Humanities, which long before me was seen as a leader on campus. We have a private endowment within a public university, and people have come to trust the institute to hold the values of the university, so as the keeper of the integrity. So I'll stop there just to say I have the foundation, we have the foundation at our university, just at this institute, to work with faculty, work with community and Kia, can I just say that Kia Caldwell, who was my colleague at UNC, was a part of that. You can attest to, and you were a part of building the Institute for the Arts and Humanities as that place of integrity. So I think there has to be that foundation of trust, real accountable leadership to lead transformational change and to call for it.
Jeffrey or Christopher, who would like to go next?
Sure. We'll just go on.
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for organizing this conference. It's really wonderful to be here. I recently went through a bit of a change myself. I moved from being the Dean of Arts and Letters and the Honors College at Michigan State to being the Provost at the University of Oregon. So not only moved across the country, but also began to think more intentionally about what does it mean to actually be the only humanist provost in the Big Ten Academic Alliance. What might that actually involve? And as I thought about that, I returned to the work of one of my most beloved thinkers, Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote a book called Holding Change. And I have been returning to this passage from that book regularly, and have been every time, when you are a new provost, you go around to all the different units and really push back on the whole idea of a stump speech. I'm really not a stump speech person. Trying to be someone who is committed to values and active leadership and relationship-based leadership. And that means that every opportunity I have to speak with a group of people is an opportunity to put my values into practice in the way that I hold a space and bring myself to the space. And I return to this passage from Adrienne Marie Brown, where she says, we need to pay attention to what we practice. Each practice of an organization is a small-scale way to grow or shrink its own realization of its espoused mission and values. And I return to that passage regularly myself in my own practices of self-reflection, which often involve less digital forms of engagement books and pens and ink, because it's an injunction, a invitation, a challenge to bring your full self and all the values that you have to every situation, to every encounter, to every context. And that requires a lot of work every day to make sure you can be fully present. And so when we think about these bigger questions of change, for me, it comes down to the next opportunity we have to be together, to think together, to put our values into intentional practice. And one of the reasons why we are, I think, in the position that we're in is because there is a misalignment between the values we say we care about as institutions, and the lived experience of our students, our faculty, and our staff. We say we care about interdisciplinary research. We say we care about publicly engaged work. We say we make a difference in communities. And then we ask our faculty to serve a set of practices and indicators that supposedly designate excellence, but are really proxy for something else. So that has to change. And I actually feel like we have an opportunity to change that every day, but also in particular right now. So I'm looking forward to this conversation to talk about how we can do that. Okay, so how can we do it?
Why did I go last?
Big picture.
And then practices,
Yeah.
and now you tell us.
Yeah, Jeffrey.
I feel like the pool of wisdom is already drained to the dregs. But no, I will tell you something very personal and then maybe frame this as a bigger question that we can talk about. So, you know, I'm Dean of Humanities at a big public university, and I didn't take on that job because I have any ambition to be a university leader or anything along those lines. I spent 20 years at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and those were 20 of the best years of my life. I loved it there. But during the first iteration of Trump being in office, I came to realize, at least for me personally, I felt like the academic system that I was part of was part of the problem. That in some ways we'd been our own worst enemy, and part of that was mistaking selectivity for excellence. They're not the same thing. And I understood why we were getting a lot of blowback in higher education. We'd come to love our own excellence based on exclusion. That's not a model that serves education well at all. We need to welcome every kind of student into every kind of educational opportunity. And we need to be heartfelt about talking about the value of what we do. When the opportunity came to be part of a university that has a mission statement that's articulated that says, we are to be judged as a comprehensive research university that creates knowledge of public value. We are judged by not whom we exclude, but by whom we include and how they succeed. I just thought, yes, that is something that we need more of. And I moved into a job where it is a challenge every day to execute that mission, but I feel good about it. And then this brings us to change. Do we get it right? No, we don't. I don't think there's any perfect educational institution. I do sincerely believe in my heart that we need every kind of university. We don't need every university to be the same, right? We need variety in university. That heterogeneity is strength. But also we need to join together in creating opportunities rather than compete with each other. And unfortunately, so much of the American educational system is based on who's going to be best at X, who's going to be best at Y. That culture of competition does not serve us well. It didn't serve us well in the humanities. It's not serving us well in other spaces. So how does this relate to the question of change? I talk to people about change a lot. I'm an academic myself. I love academics, but I do feel like in general, academics are change averse, sometimes with really good reason, right? Change always seems like loss. It's really hard for us to imagine a change that is a gain, because change often gets framed as giving something up. It can be our comfortableness within disciplines. It can be the kind of ambit of what we're expected to do. Those things can be anxiety producing because we work so hard to get where we are and to create a life that feels like it's a workable life. And one of the hardest things to do is to convince people that the change that comes from collaboration, while validating that it is kind of scary, is ultimately a gain, and it's a communal gain. And have so much in the academic reward system is highly individualized. We love our scholars that we give awards to, we love our MacArthur geniuses, we love our trailblazers, but we forget that their work was enabled. I mean, we already saw an acknowledgement here, right? It's by working together that people advance. And without being able to talk about the advancing everyone together as part of our change system, I think will always go wrong, and it will seem to individuals that they're giving things up rather than bringing others forward. So maybe I'll just leave that as the bigger narration.
Wonderful. We can stop here. Okay, the next question is about leadership, and I think this question speaks to courage in many ways. So there are times when leaders should resist certain trends or changing winds. How can leaders effectively resist and set positive examples of resistance? And I will also add to this question that I was in a conversation with some colleagues here last week about how we're defining leadership at WashU, because we have a whole initiative called WashU Leads for students, faculty, and staff. And one person wanted to frame it as, having the courage to resist the status quo. And I said, well, not everyone feels comfortable doing that or safe to do that. So I'll just add that caveat, and from where you sit also in your leadership positions, how much do you perhaps feel that you can resist the status quo?
Why don't we start?
Start in the middle.
Start in the middle. I appreciate this question now. I'm a little bit less worried at the moment about status quo than resisting the pressures that are being put upon us right now from the federal actions that we're experiencing. Maybe I could get at something by talking about some pressures that I'm feeling in my role as provost. From the faculty, there's a real desire for strong state. And I've had a number of conversations with faculty at Oregon where there's this yearning for the provost, the president, to say something. Say something in a certain register, namely, say something publicly to everyone at the same time. And, we really have been trying to be thoughtful about how we're responding to the current political situation, both in terms of trying to understand what exactly is happening, and in terms of figuring out what is the best way to ensure that the most important thing continues to be empowered and enabled, namely the teaching and learning and research of our faculty and our students. And my natural intuition, I love a blog post. I love a public, I love something public. That's my whole deal has been to try to do the work out loud. Show the work. Because that's part of this bigger question about how do we recognize not just the products of the work, but the process that went into it, publicly engaged work. But I'm also very attuned to the fact that that public work isn't possible without a kind of connectedness, a kind of privacy isn't quite the right word, intimacy, connectedness. Opportunity to actually meet each other where we are, to think, to reflect on what we're doing, and to have those transformative moments that come in between us as we engage. And so the resistance, going back to the point I was making earlier, comes in the everyday practices. How are we creating and holding spaces like this? How are we creating and holding spaces in our classroom to ensure that the widest diversity of perspectives are heard, that everyone is feeling like they can be who they are so that they can think most deeply about the human condition, about the area of study, about the issue, whatever it is that we're working with. We don't have a lot of places in this society for that. And a university should be that kind of a place. So how do we cultivate those spaces? And I think a core part of it is not making statements about it, but doing it. Every day, every time you have a chance.
Because you said a lot of the things I would say. I do often think that as academics, our Achilles heel is to mistake statements for actions. Statements are not, I mean, they can be the beginning of actions, they can be a summation of common values, though I often find that they tend to be a little on the flat side when it comes to what a community actually values. Communities are much more diverse than statements in many ways. I would want to emphasize too that a missing piece that we often have is trust, and also ascribing to people good motives. We live in a culture where those things, and I think this actually is symptomatic in living at a moment where social media really encourages us to be distrustful and to impugn terrible motives to everything that we see, to quibble, to take apart, and rather we've lost our ability sometimes to affirm, to build together, to construct. It's really easy to say what we're against. There's nothing more facile, honestly. It's so much harder to say what we're affirming, what we're building together, where we're headed together. That's where the harder work is. So one other thing along these lines too, and it came again out of my weariness about living in DC under Trump 1. I was at every protest. It was my weekend thing. I had a lot of clever signs. If clever signs could make Trump resign, he would have resigned in 2016, believe me. But then at a certain point, I came to realize that I was doing that for me because it was nice to be in a crowd of like-minded people. It was very energizing. I wasn't actually moving the needle in ways that were building the kinds of infrastructure that we need in order to get beyond some of the challenges that we were feeling. So part of my dedication at the moment is to build things rather than be against things, to kind of create resilient infrastructures rather than denounce the things that are coming our way. And to really lean into the fact that we as academics and intellectuals have a lot of knowledge that is really useful at this current moment. One of my proudest moments as a leader was when I could step back in my leadership role and simply rely on my trusted colleagues. Our campus, like every campus, was being torn apart with protests that got bifurcated into the point of ridiculousness around Gaza and Israel and against, and rather than just trying to explore the complexities of that issue, fortunate in that I have 3 centers that report up to me as Dean of Humanities: Center for Study, Religion, and Conflict, Center for Jewish Studies, Center for the Muslim Experience in the US. And I asked them if they would model for our campus a way to actually have a conversation where we could get more information, listen, attend to each other, learn to frame questions, and then get some of the information that was missing. So we had 120 people that gathered. Not everyone agreed with every speaker. My God, no. There was no way that that was going to happen. But what we did see is academics across differences be able to historically inform, patiently explain, challenge each other. Right? They felt free to challenge each other, but not sloganeer, not yell at each other, not denounce, actually stage a moment of learning. I think it was less important for the academics who were up there than it was for the audience to see this could be a moment of informing ourselves and that we can do something with that knowledge. That is what an academic institution should be all about, providing knowledge at critical junctures so that people can make better decisions about what they're going to do next.
Yeah, and well, each of you was speaking. It occurred to me that we have three sort of hierarchical levels here, right? A provost, a dean, and a director. And I'm going to venture to say that I'm closest right now to faculty perspective. So I'm going to sort of offer that sort of in response to what you all have laid out. And what I would say is that I think faculty want to hear our leaders say, in the context of this, the question of resistance, just specifically that, we want to hear our leaders say the things that we would say in response to what we're asked to do. So let me give an example of that. Before there were banned words, now that's a whole new ball game, but you know, I'm going to go back to last year, and our University of North Carolina was one of the leaders behind Florida in, I think there were times when people thought we're trying to be Florida, and I'm not trying to slur anything. I'm just saying in terms of their actions toward eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion, and basically eliminating academic freedom. But so before there was this sort of federal mandate, our state legislature made some decisions. They first started with an inventory of diversity programs. Again, this was before there was any sort of shuttering of any programs and that sort of thing. And I think that in those moments, we just wanted to hear, and they gave the whole campus like something like 4 weeks to inventory these. There was no rationale. We didn't know what was going to be used. We just wanted to hear the leaders. They didn't have to let us hear, but just to say that they had asked these particular questions, that they had pushed back on the timing. Like we're trying to start a semester, and you're asking faculty to stop planning for their courses, and you're asking for, you know, to do these kinds of inventory. And some of the words, some of the things that they were asking people to do, when they were to identify things like the LGBTQ, like here are the key words you should look for. And so then it's like where's this going? Like this, you know? And so just to acknowledge, I think that's what people wanted to hear. And we didn't hear that. Instead, what we heard was, let's have meetings so we'll know exactly how to do this and do it correctly. So I was the person that spoke up in our meeting that our dean didn't convene it. He had one of his senior associate deans to convene it, to just say, it seemed violent. And at that time, that seemed over the top. I think it's pretty prescient at this point. But for people to sit here, and already there's this nervousness. So I think that's the thing. It's like the statements, I'm not sure about, for all the reasons that you mentioned. You know, you can't speak for everybody. But for those kinds of human values, to acknowledge, when you're talking about the practices, to acknowledge where people actually are, that goes a long way in building relationships. And then I guess the other thing I would say that I absolutely agree with, I've heard from both of you in terms of, I don't want to set up this sort of dichotomy. I'm going to be with you back, but right now I'm sort of channeling the faculty here. But this idea of creating the space for those relationships, for dialogue. I heard you say that, Jeffrey, and and you, Chris, in terms of the what are our practices. And I think that the humanities, that is absolutely the place for humanities centers and institutes to hold those spaces. And so I think that that's, we're on the right track for doing that. So
I mean, I think one thing to think about is how can we create together those kinds of spaces where leaders are not feeling like that they can't be fully vulnerable and authentic about their struggles. The expectation sometimes feels like, okay, well, we need this strong statement because we're feeling scared, we're feeling unsure, and we want you to know, we want to know you have our back. And in a context like the one we're currently in, there's a level of uncertainty that we're all feeling.
Yes.
And I don't think it's reassuring to pretend we in the highest ranks of leadership don't also feel that. And my own experience is when I feel more reassured when somebody actually owns their own uncertainty. Mm-hmm. Because I know I'm dealing with somebody who's thinking about the broader context and somebody who's really meaningfully present.
Yes.
And so I feel like there's kind of more solidarity needs to be built between the faculty and the administration on both sides. I think the administration needs to be, administrators like me need to figure out ways to create spaces where we can be human, where we can be, be unsure, be uncertain, be very definite about the things we value and the things we're going to stand up for and the things we care most deeply about. And on the faculty side, I feel like there's a need to, move beyond the need for catharsis. Yeah, everybody's pissed off, everybody's frustrated, everybody's scared, to a space of a deeper understanding of the complexities of the issues that we're dealing with. It's not as simple as X, Y, or Z to do. If it were, we would have done it already, I think. So I feel like where can we and how can we build that kind of solidarity across the institution? Because otherwise we're not going to be able to deal with an external threat that is existential for our institution.
And if I may, so you've mentioned Adrienne Marie Brown, whom we both have a lot of respect for. Adrienne Marie Brown's philosophy is based on the philosophy of Ella Baker. So I'm going to bring Ella Baker into the room. I wrote a book about Ella Baker and been trying to follow her process since you raised the question of solidarity. Yeah. And one of the things that I think about is how to put her model, and her approach in practice in areas like academia. So not necessarily going into communities, but it's the same deal. I mean, it's the same people. You're talking about thinking about people and where the community power is. But community power in service to social justice, to the public good. I mean, we have to make clear that's part of what her process is. So, if I may, thinking about this from your perspective as of a provost, and you're the kind of provost where this model would work. You're a unicorn. You already know it.
You're still
more.
I know, but anyway, so let's say that you're in this situation that I sort of described, and let's make it even worse in terms of it's just so complex, and there are all these things, and there's all this turmoil and so forth. And you come in and you have the public good, you have the community good in mind, and knowing your own vulnerability. Your strategy at that point will be to find who in the community of faculty, this is what Ella Baker did when she went into communities where there people were under siege in the Jim Crow era, where if you speaking up and trying to vote, trying to organize would get you killed. But she knew there was someone there who was already doing that work. She never assumed that she'd go into a community and she's going to tell people how they're supposed to, you know. And so who among your faculty, who among your senior associate deans, who among your deans understand the work that we're trying to do in terms of building trust, doing the practices that will get us, that will move us forward in solidarity. So I think that's the first strategy. And then that, because you can't have that kind of intimacy that you keep
Right.
talking about with everybody.
No.
So you got to find out, which is great. I mean, so yeah, find out who would be that group of leaders, and then that starts to grow the solidarity.
Yes.
Can I say one thing related to that? So it's not just find them, grow them.
Yes.
It's to
Yeah.
get
That's all
around.
Baker.
But one of the binaries that also kills us is to think that there's administration and there's faculty. And as I remind faculty all the time, like, I'm faculty too. Like, I didn't just spring into an administrative job out of nowhere.
Some do. I mean, my chancellor was a lawyer, and
Non-academic.
he's never been in academia. So
Yeah,
anyway.
right, and
Just
some
so
of
you
us do suffer under
That's
the
right.
businessman or the senator who gets dropped in, and that it never works out well. Like, so, I mean, rarely does it work out well. But I go back, Andrew, to what you said. You know, I do find that humanists make good leaders, and I work really hard to ensure that, especially associate professors moving toward their final promotion into full, also get leadership training and can see themselves as being the next generation of people who are going to step up and do things. It's not that hard, but we do too often steer our junior academic colleagues into situations of leadership that they're unprepared for, which sets them up to fail and think that leadership is not for them. The failure's on us if they get guided into these positions and don't have the training that they need to succeed.
Excellent. So shifting just a little bit for our final question, this is about the future of the humanities. And so we've talked, I think, quite a bit about disruption, external and existential threats. What do you see as being the future of the humanities? And are there places, disciplines, or fields in which the humanities could be proactively evolving? And I want to also just tie what you just said, Jeffrey, about leadership to the work that IAH does. It has a leadership program.
Yes, we do.
Right, which is interdisciplinary. But I don't know if you want to talk about that, Pat, but I just thought about that as a connector and how we need to be also growing leaders within the humanities. But just going back to the future, what do you see as being the future of the humanities in this moment?
Well, I will speak to that, and I'll start with our academic leadership program, because I think that is a part of sort of if we understand what the humanities can do in this moment, and then we have to have the leaders who are able to sort of move that forward. So at the Institute for the Arts and Humanities, we have something called the Academic Leadership Program. It's a cohort-based program in which faculty and administrators are nominated, or they can be self-nominated to be a part of this program. Once we select the eight, there are eight folks. And by the way, Holden Thorpe, lots of you know him, who's our former chancellor, is an alum of this program. He can tell you that his class, I'm class of 2011, and our cohort still gathers. That's how strong the relationships are. So it's a year-long program. Each of the eight folks will take part in a workshop, a week-long workshop that's sponsored by the Centers for Creative Leadership, and this is a national center. So these academics get dropped into this national leadership program for a week, and then so that's their first foundation, just to learn the language of leadership. And they might be like in my cohort at this Center for Creative Leadership, I was with vice presidents of corporations and so forth. So that's the first thing. And then they have a retreat to begin with, where they spend 2 days together, getting to know each other, their life stories. And so, again, in my cohort, there was a senior associate dean, there were folks from different areas across campus, very interdisciplinary. And then we have a weekly meeting in the spring where they are learning about leadership within the academic context and dealing with some of the large questions that come up in terms of the complexity of leading in these. Right now, there's a cohort that they're thinking about leading in these turbulent times. And it's very, it's sort of a way of, and I know for me, I'll just speak to myself, I didn't see myself as a leader at that point. And the people in that room saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and certainly my colleagues in my department didn't see. I'm just saying that these are academic politics. And before you know it, I mean, I've become that on campus, and I think that's true for lots of folks.
Now she directs the institute.
I do, and I would never, at that point, I never saw myself as being a director of that institute. And I'm the 5th director, and the first woman and the first person of color. So it says a lot about in terms of where that went.
So I think I'll take a different tack and go back to the beginning. One of the things I think about a lot, because we're talking about humanities and futures and so forth, and absolutely agree with you, like endpoint for faculty, we have to give them a leadership training that forges the future. But beginning point, one thing I think about quite a bit is that we have invested tens of millions of dollars into reinventing graduate education in the humanities. We've done so over the last 15 to 20 years. We have almost nothing to show from it. Oh, it's not money well spent, and I truly believe it was because it was cart before the horse. Reinvention happens at the undergraduate level. If we don't have undergraduates ready to go in humanities, we don't have graduate programs. That's always been our missing piece. And I think because we're talking about change, the hardest part for most of us is that the disciplines into which we were trained and we're trained to love might not be the future humanities disciplines. And that does feel like loss because we have professional societies around them. We have so much of our identity around them. Those disciplines do not matter to young people. They don't choose an English major because they understand what English is. What even is English? So many things happen under that rubric, right? They'll find a class that impassions them and off they go. History, philosophy, these will mean things to some highly motivated students, usually from pretty elite backgrounds, but they won't necessarily mean anything to first-generation students. That's not their fault. They just don't know what they don't know from the start what they'll get out of engaged study with some of the disciplines that we love. So we need to find ways in. Sometimes it's by doing disciplinary work by another name. Sometimes it's by doing interdisciplinary work in ways that reconfigures disciplines. One of the programs I'm proudest of at ASU that I asked my faculty to think about is we identified that students vote with their feet for humanities classes that are about culture, kind of like intercultural competence, languages, being a global citizen, technology, because they're really concerned about it, but especially technology and ethics, the more humanistic part of it, and humane technology, and environment around climate change, and humanities courses on climate change. So we took classes that we were already teaching in all of those areas and created a BA in culture, technology, and environment. It really was just coming up with a major map that made use of what our faculty had expertise in, had an intro course and a capstone. And already students are like, oh yeah, I understand what that is. I understand what I'll get out of it. I understand the kinds of questions I want to ask. So part of it is simply meeting our students where they are.
Human beings want meaning. They want a sense of purpose. They want connection. They want to be able to put their purpose into the world, into practice, into a life that's meaningful, fulfilling. That's what the humanities offers. That's what it has always offered. And as we think about on the academic side where the humanities are headed, it has to be to put those commitments to purpose and the connection to reciprocity, to respect, into practice in communities, with communities, in public, to make the public and those communities richer, better, more connected, more able to fulfill their highest aspirations and dreams. And honestly, that's the kind of leadership that we need in higher education. We need a leadership that is like Ellen Baker. We need a leadership that is listening and attending, as you said, is able to build trust, not just manage crisis, but actually create meaning and purpose. And that comes in a whole different way of engaging than you learn in a traditional leadership program. So what I love about your leadership program is that you're teaching from that core set of commitments that come out of the humanities, and not from a profit management perspective, but from a humanistic commitment to deepening our relationships with each other and empowering these very important institutions, these spaces, these universities, to actually serve the public in the way they were originally created to do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I will say, and I don't think you know this, Matt, but we have a leadership institute for faculty here called the Faculty Transformational Leadership Institute, which I co-developed. We have our second cohort now, and it's based on ALP, as an ALP alum. So just, that has borne fruit outside of UNC and now has had an impact here at WashU. So we have about 17 minutes or so left. I'm going to open it up to all of you to ask questions and make comments and reflect on the really rich, I think, things that have been shared here so far. So, yes.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Laura. I'm a PhD student in English, and my question is about sort of the role of graduate students in all of the conversations, leadership, transformative change, those elements, and thinking through the vast majority of us, it's very transient by design, right? So we're here 4, 5, 6, 7 years roughly, and then we move on to another institution or another role outside of our alma mater. And so thinking through what are some tangible, concrete ways graduate students can shape and inform policy and change while we're here, thinking specifically about the needs of graduate students who will come after us. So it's like a question of legacy that also is acknowledging just the very real impermanence of being a graduate student. But in the humanities specifically, many of us interact a lot with undergrads. We teach them, we mentor them, and this connects, I think, to what you were saying about rethinking curriculum at the undergraduate level, and I think humanities PhD students are uniquely situated to think through that with other faculty, and would love, please draw on, and any of you who can answer, it's not targeted, but if you want to draw on your own experiences or graduate students you've worked with, or how your institutions are thinking through these relationships, would just love to hear a little bit more.
It's really hard to be a graduate student right now.
I don't need sympathy.
But how about validation? I mean, validation is not sympathy. It's just to say it is tough right now, and there is no magic to trying to say, oh, if only we do this, we'll get better outcomes and everybody gets jobs. It's just not going to happen. So I feel that one of the ways that faculty can be more supportive of enabling their graduate students to have many future options rather than just thinking of one, is to invite them into those kinds of conversations, to from the start support them in their own ambition to try new things and to create that space, and to maybe ease back on the obsession with disciplinary training that's like deep across every period ever conceived and every and not to worry about that so much, but to be a little more student-centered, to come up with graduate programs that allow flourishing of different kinds of expertise and really emphasizes things like skills that are going to come out of it. I'm probably an outlier in saying that, you know, I was very unhappy as a graduate student. I was happy to study. I was happy to have some years of support where I got to do a project that was important to me, but never felt from anybody I worked with that I was being cultivated for anything but a mini replica of what they were doing, which did not seem tolerable to me. And you know, here I am a university administrator, so nobody has to believe me on this, but I didn't expect to get a job. I almost didn't get a job, and had I wound up in a different field, no matter what, I was really happy for the time I spent as a graduate student because I was kind of left alone to do my own things, and I found space. And one of the things I try to do for my own graduate students and undergraduates is give them space and support to develop what they need to do next, and then to not judge them for what that next is. They should have as many possibilities there as they can have. So yes, support them toward an academic journey if that's what's going to be next for them, if that's what they're going to try at. But also support them for making a different kind of life too. The easy way to say that is be humane. Yeah.
You want me to go? Okay. I'm not trying to channel Ella Baker a little bit here.
It would be helpful if I could clarify a little bit more what I was saying, thinking about how graduate students can positively impact their institution when they're there.
Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree, and those are all concerns we have post-graduation, but what are ways we can, very idealistically, I realize, like, make the institution better than we found it?
Yes.
Regardless of where we wind up.
Yeah.
If that,
I mean, I really appreciate that framing.
Yeah.
And that's why I was going back to thinking about Ella Baker in the sense that there are opportunities you have as a graduate student to identify colleagues in your graduate programs and across graduate programs. Maybe you're sitting next to some of them right now. Across graduate programs, and then with faculty who are resonating with the work of creating the kind of university we need to be better and different, to empower every future graduate student to bring their core values to their work and then give them a way to put those values into their scholarship, into their research, into their teaching, and into the ways they engage their community. And so all the points that you're making around the kind of infrastructure and the weight of how graduate education has historically been done, and the real need to push back against some of those traditional frameworks is only possible when there is a very intentional approach to building relationships with colleagues across the wide diversity of relationships that you can build as a graduate student, because your position is such an interesting and important space. You have access to the most amazing faculty. You have access to the most amazing undergraduate students. And you also, as you can identify potential administrators across the university who are resonating with the kind of future that you're hoping to create, those are connections to make. And I think that's the way, that's the way to make the meaningful change that will be enduring.
I would agree with that, and put a finer point on it, which is to say, when change happens at university, typically there are processes through which something becomes institutionalized or something. And so my first approach to any kind of change to begin with is to look at how does the infrastructure work, and how do we use those mechanisms for change. And I have a specific example related to graduate student education that I want to give, but before I do that, I want to ask you, Lori?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Laura.
Laura, thank you. Did you have something in particular in mind that you thought needed to happen while you're a student here? Or something that had an example of something that you wanted to see?
I mean, I can highlight, the space that we're in right now, like both the Center for Humanities is doing, Program and Public Scholarship are all fantastic models. And Center for Environment as well, I think what they're doing with graduate students. Other ideas I have, I'd love to talk off stage.
Let's look at public scholarship,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
All right, so, and it just so happens that that's the example I was gonna give from my institution. So I helped to found a graduate certificate in participatory research, which is, as you know, the foundation of doing any kind of engaged or public scholarship that involves working directly with communities. And that absolutely was a bringing together of the whole community. At that time, this was in the early to mid 2000s, when nobody was really thinking about participatory research as sort of this, really legitimate. I mean, I guess we've gotten to the point where someone says legitimate, but it wasn't, a lot of people weren't doing it. And so graduate students, there were some faculty, I was one of them, I had just gotten tenure, and I was ready to start the Ella Baker Women's Center and doing that engaged work, to a professor in public health, who, they were the folks who decades ago had really pioneered participatory research and community-based research and so forth. So we knew that we had the right community, and graduate students were absolutely part of the leadership of that. And then we started working with the infrastructure of the university. At that time, if you wanted to get a new idea out, and you had to create a Carolina seminar. And so we convened a seminar, and that brought folks in there. And then the next thing we did was to start to think about, look at other certificate programs, and then go through our graduate academic policy committee, on which I happen to be serving on the board. But but that didn't really matter. I mean, it's just like, so going through those, and eventually it became a certificate, and it was very different from other certificates in that we built in seed grants so that students would be able to have access to funding to do, because if you're doing a participatory dissertation, you have to have funding to be able to go to do that work in communities. We had community experts, and so building in that infrastructure, we worked with the IRB to get them to, sometimes you have to retrofit the university for some things. And so to get them to acknowledge that in the thing. So there are ways, so I think what you said, work with the faculty that you know are passionate about this, and who then will know the infrastructure. And I have to say, with the graduate students, this is also Ella Baker's approach. We need your energy. Like, you'll show up and do, you'll do things and say things that we are hesitant to say. I'm not talking about your labor in this point. I'm talking actually about your energy, your spirit, your willingness to say, no, we need this. And then we were like, okay, well, let's see how we can make it happen. So having that, go for it in that way. That's my,
I will open it up. I have a quick thought too, because I think this is important for all of us to keep in mind, that we need to listen to our graduate students more and to our undergraduate students. You all often have a different generational perspective, a different experiential perspective. And I think, as you said, Jeffrey, grad school is hard. It's a hazing process, I dare say. And so I think, instead of us always adopting a top-down perspective of training our grad students, really seeing you all as contributors to the institutional mission. And if we think about it, we talk about students, faculty, and staff, but even here at WashU, our grad students get lost in the mix somewhat because we do have such a heavy undergraduate focus on the Danforth campus. So I think that requires us to flip our own model of how we interact with and think about grad students. It looks like you had something to.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of follow up on this conversation because it's really interesting. I'm also a graduate student. My name is Crystal Dean. But I think what I'm curious about is sort of how do we validate the time here that graduate students have in a particular city, in a particular town, right? As sort of, okay, if you visualize this town as like your home for the next 5, 6, 7 years, right, then what's your responsibility to the community as well, right? So you spoke about sort of serving the public good, right? And I think that might be something that a lot of universities are successful with doing on an undergrad level, right? So pushing volunteer work, pushing sort of civil engagement, right? But as grad students, we are also sort of positioned to be able to think beyond just university, right? We come in and we're like given sort of a handbook about like, this is what you need to do in your discipline in order to graduate, right? And I think the infrastructures that we have at WashU, like the Center for Humanities, offers sort of like, do you want to professionalize yourself? Do you want to get in touch with community members? These are the people that are looking for grad students, right? And so that has been really useful. But right now it's still in a position where the individual graduate student has to look for that opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Has to sort of take agency in getting out of their own department, right? Where you could come here for 6 or 7 years and truly not know anybody in the community, right? And so how do we sort of uncouple, right, that just higher education identity from being a human, right, and being sort of involved in the community that we are living in for 6 years, right? How do we contribute? And I would say too that sometimes that also creates a good pipeline, right? So I do work with high school students. These high school students, they always think that WashU is not for them, right? But seeing an example and talking to people there, right, that also creates a
That's connection.
Yeah.
Well, we just have 1 minute. Does anyone want to make a statement or ask a question before we wrap up?
And do you want to respond?
I would love to just say, I mean, I think what you're articulating there is that experience that you're having as a graduate student is also true of each of us as we enter into a new community and try to imagine what kind of meaningful career and life we want to have. And the experience that you have in which you're saying my academic life expands beyond just the work I do with my students in the classroom, just my research that I'm doing to get this credential, but it is one of the ways that I am trying to integrate my commitment into a broader community. The alienation that you feel when the institution and the graduate program does not recognize that practice, that work, as holistically a part of your scholarship, who you are as a person, as a researcher, as a scholar, as a teacher, and requires you to separate yourself from yourself in a way that's alienating. That's what we have to combat. And we need help on the institutional side with articulations of what it would meaningfully mean to build the structure that would allow you to express fully yourself as an academic, as a scholar, as a human being. And on the way, get a PhD or get a whatever degree that you're getting, right? Which is a great, important credential because then you can do it at higher levels of impact. But if the cost of that degree is going to be your sense of who you are, it's no wonder we're losing people left and right. And it's no wonder why the public doesn't come to the defense of the university when it's being attacked.
Something we'll be talking about later.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the rich questions and, food for thought.
Yeah.